This is the remediation video for quadratic equations for Algebra 2. What will you learn in this video? We're going to do a review on the basics of starting to solve quadratics, and then we're also going to talk about the difference of when you should use the x method versus when you should use the quadratic formula. So that's actually the point of this whole target of the exam, is you being able to identify when it's best to use the x method versus when it's best to use quadratic formula. Now, if you really do like the quadratic formula, it is reliable and you can use it for all cases. Unfortunately for the x method, it doesn't work for all cases, and that's why sometimes we have to use the quadratic formula. So first, for the review, the x method is when we have a trinomial or quadratic and we're trying to solve for the factors or the solutions. So this is when you draw an x, and on the top we put a times c, and on the bottom we put plus b. And remember, in class I actually taught you guys a song, a times c, better add to b, woo! Okay, so that's how we can memorize it. Now, a, b, and c are the coefficients in the quadratic. And then the other thing you need to remember is to not forget to set it equal to 0. Below we have the quadratic formula, which you learned in the previous target, 4.2. And the formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Again, you substitute a, b, and c in because those are the coefficients in the quadratic. So first we're going to do the type 1 problem, which is a review on factoring trinomials. So this is when you can do the x method. Now, there's no way that you can just look at this problem and know, oh, I need to use the x method. What we like to do is always try out the x method, and if it doesn't work, that's when you would use the quadratic formula. So first you need to set the equation equal to 0, and it already is, so we're good. And then you need to check that it's in descending order. So we're going to make sure that it's m to the power of 2, m to the power of 1, and then the last group has no m. Now in this case the variable is m, sometimes it will be x in other problems, n, c, a, whatever letter, whatever variable, it just has to be that the exponents are going 2, 1, and then nothing. Now we can identify a, b, and c, because those are the coefficients. So a is 1, b is negative 5, and c is negative 14. So now we're going to draw the x, and on top goes a times c, and on the bottom it's better add to b. So a times c is negative 14, and then b is negative 5. Off to the right, we're going to find the factors of 14. So always start with 1, and then we'll move our way up. So 1 times what is 14, which would be 14. 2 times 7 is 14, and then that's actually our only option. So we only have 2 options here. Now the goal is that it multiplies to 14, which we already know it does. 1 times 14 and 2 times 7 equal 14. But we need it to also add or subtract to 5. And the only way we're going to be able to get to 5 is by using 2 and 7. Now, 2 times 7 is 14, but we need negative 14. So that means one of these numbers is negative. Now, if we look at the bottom, we want to make sure that it's getting negative 5. So in this case, that means I would need it to either be negative 2 plus 7 or positive 2 minus 7, right? Either the negative is with the 2 or the negative is with the 7. In this case, it would have to be with the 7 because that equals negative 5. If we did negative 2 plus 7, that's positive 5, and that's not going to work. So in this case, 7 is negative. Now we're going to write two parentheses, two sets of parentheses. We're going to put the variable that we're using. The variable we're using is m. And then we're going to put the answers, which is 2 and negative 7. I'm going to put positive 2 and negative 7. Now for solving for the final answers, this is factored form. If we want to actually identify the solutions, we're going to have to change the sign. So if it's positive 2, it's going to become negative. And if it's negative 7, it's going to become positive. And those are our two solutions for this problem. You can call them solutions, factors, roots, intercepts. Okay. So that's a review of fracturing trinomials, which you learned in Algebra 1 and in the previous unit of Algebra 2. Now we're going to go to another example very similar. It is the x method. So step 1 is make sure that's equal to 0, and it is. Step 2 normally is A, B, and C, but unfortunately this problem has a GCF. So we need to take the GCF out. So in this case, the common number that they have, the greatest common factor, would be 2. So we're going to take out a 2 and then find out what's left over of this quadratic. So basically you're going to divide out 2 from each group. So that cancels. I have m squared, cancels. I have positive m. And then negative 12 divided by 2 would be negative 6. Which makes sense. If you distributed this out with distributive property, you would get the original problem. Okay, now that you've factored out the GCF out here, we can identify A, B, and C. A is 1, B is positive 1, and C is negative 6. Now we're going to do the x method, where we do A times C better add to B. Okay, so in this case, A times C is negative 6, and then B is positive 1. So now we're going to write the factors of 6, and you can ignore the negative. So factors of 6 include 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. So I only have 2 options, and the only option that's going to get me to adding to 1 would be 2 and 3. Now I want it to be a positive 1, so that means it would have to be negative 2. So again, let's check that these numbers are correct. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. And then 3 minus 2 is positive 1. So those are correct. So now we're going to do 2 sets of parentheses. And again, use the correct variable. In this case, it's m. Write in our answers that we got right here. And then most importantly, do not forget the GCF that is out in front. We're going to put it out in front here as well. So again, that's factored form. If I want the real solutions, I'm going to change the sign. Okay, and that's how we would solve that problem. That's type 1. Now, type 2 is the type when we need to use a quadratic formula, and I'm going to show you how you know that it's the type you need to. Now, I like to keep a positive, so I'm going to keep the 9n squared on this side. I'm going to have to move the 7n over first because that's the second group, because we have to go in descending order. So if it's positive there, it becomes negative. Then I would do the number last. Again, that one's positive, it becomes negative. And then I have equals 0. So in this case, A is 9, B is negative 7, and C is negative 4. Now I'm always going to try the x method first because I find it easier. So A times C would be negative 36, and B would be negative 7. Now we're going to do the factors of 36. Again, you can ignore the negative. So factors of 36 is 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and 6 by 6. So now I have 5 different options, but I want it to add or subtract to negative 7. So no matter what you do here, none of these are going to get you to 7. The difference between 1 and 36, the difference is 35. The difference between 2 and 18 is 16. The difference between 12 and 3 is 9. The difference between 4 and 9 is 5. And the difference between 6 and 6 is 0. So none of those, no matter if you plus, minus, choose a negative on a different one, or both negative, both positive, none of them are going to get you to negative 7. So this way does not work. So because it does not work, we have to use the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So anytime there's a variable, I'm going to put parentheses. And then now I'm going to substitute. So first we have b, which is -7. And then we have a, which is 9. And then lastly, we have c, which is -4. Now what I like to do is I like to do it in parts. So for this one, I'm going to solve that part. I'm going to solve the inside, and then I'm going to solve the bottom. So a negative and a negative becomes positive, so we get +7. And then on the bottom we have 2 times 9, which is 18. Now the part in the root, you can use your TI-84 calculator, I highly recommend it. Type it exactly as is with all those parentheses. So we have parentheses -7 parentheses squared -4 parentheses, a is 9, and then c is -4. And the answer is 193. Now, let's check if we can simplify that root. Can we simplify the root? So you're going to click second and then this button, 193. Is that a nice number that you can simplify it to? No. So I'm going to leave that root as is. But because we have that plus and minus symbol, right, it's right here, we have to do 2 options for the answer. So the first one will be positive, and then the second one will be minus, or negative. And those are the 2 answers. So just some common mistakes to go over before you start the exam or the retake would be that most people here copy incorrectly into the calculator because of a negative versus a minus. So in the calculator, negative is shorter and then the minus is a lot longer. Okay, another common mistake is that people don't know how to do the root, or they forget a symbol. And then the last mistake many people made was they did not write out their 2 options, or they did not use the plus minus symbol, which you need to, okay? So for example, if you wrote 7 square root 193 over 18, this is wrong, and that's because you're forgetting the plus minus symbol right there. So now go do the required practice for this, and then you qualify for the retake. Good job.